This podcast is brought to you by Reimagine Radio, the online radio station that aims to give you information on disability and music. Welcome back to Reimagine Radio's Artist Feature. On today's program, we have part 2 of my interview with Simon Paradis and Paul Rigby. We picked up where we left off after the first interview. Well, gents, just moving on a little bit, just given our time, want to make sure that we have time.
That was one question.
I know, right?
It's 2 o'clock.
Yeah. So, Paul, having been a professional musician for most of your life, how have you seen the landscape change? And, you know, you've toured across the world. And have you seen a change maybe for being more inclusive with people with disabilities?
You know, I was thinking about this probably for attendance, probably yes, right. Just in terms of accessibility to clubs. And that doesn't certainly, I don't know if that goes for the majority of clubs right now, but certainly in a few of them. Right. I can think of, like, even though off my head, like 5 places they're just the drag. The place that I met Simon at, although it was just an after hours place, right. You know, as I got there, he's just like, I got to go because I can't stay here all night. No. And that was an accessibility issue. So yeah, I guess in terms of attendance and audience and possibly backstages at larger places like Commodore, right. I've seen a change in accessibility in terms of actual musicians playing. I don't think VAMS is the first place where I was like, why don't I see these guys everywhere? Because everybody's happening. Yeah. And I don't know what that is, and I don't know how to change that because I haven't really seen any. Simon must have a better concept of this.
Well, you know, for me, I think it's difficult for a lot of venue owners who are on leases dealing with the grandfathering of the structures that they're presented with, and like who's going to make the investment to upgrade it to make it friendly for access. That's what I loved about the Culture was that it was like the entire building was the embodiment of accessibility on every front. So that made it easy. When Joe and I went on our little tour out east. Yeah, we ended up playing at the Burdock in Toronto, and they knew like months ahead of time this guy in this wheelchair is coming to play this show, right? Yeah. And I got there, and still we had to get 3 people from the audience and pull me up the 4-foot onto the stage. You know, there was nobody had any kind of amenities to deal with that. I wouldn't have ever been able to use their washroom, like nothing like that. Yeah, like that's what I mean. And I find that frustrating. Yeah, I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, no, I mean...
I see what you're saying about funding, like, of course. But I feel like, is there not funding available somehow, some way?
Well, I think it lies a lot in the way that people allocate their taxes. I think there's a way for the people who own those structures who are, like, charging the leases can say, okay, I will do this renovation, and a percentage of this renovation I'll be able to claim. Yeah. But I don't know if the business model is advantageous if you're dealing with like the arts and performance and how they're getting their money based on the avenues that are being, monetized. Like if it's a place where you get live bands to play, how much money are you making from your lease for those people to handle that that kind of thing? Is it possible for them to then invest the money to make it more accessible? Are you really going to get that many more, mobility challenged performers coming in and bringing a big economy in?
And touching on that point, Simon, I actually was having a conversation yesterday, and there was a older venue in Vancouver, and it was a two-parted thing, one for accessibility with the audience seating, but also for performers. And I know that he's not the one that makes those decisions. But he said they had conversations around this, and he said if we start opening up the building for construction or things like that, they're going to find all the other issues that they have to deal with after the fact. So that's why, and I there's a part of me that understands where the venue's coming from, but I don't agree with it necessarily. Well, I don't agree with that section because, especially where we're at, I think the conversation needs to be had. Like, why is a venue 50% accessible which doesn't mean it's accessible. Right.
I think that those conversations, I mean, it's hilarious. I mean, it's sad that it even has to be a conversation, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, oh, come on. You know, I'm thinking of, like, I haven't really played in clubs for a long time as a, like, regular thing. So I don't know what's changed there, but I know that the theaters and things that I've played are definitely accessible backstage, but they also have more money because they're big, giant places, you know?
And I think more so it's when new structures are being built.
Yeah, right.
That there's a whole new set of regulations that actually have to be followed to accommodate, you know, the litigation of accessibility. But it's the problem is the older structures. Like, man, I would have loved to go play a gig at the railway.
Right. But it's not easy.
You know, and it's a small place to navigate in a wide chair. And I mean, I know Jay knows a guy in a chair who likes to bump down the stairs in his wheelchair there.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't enjoy that.
No.
That's not my life. So
no.
And touching on your point too, Simon, like I know myself and Dave Simonton, like the city is aware, and that we definitely have had conversations with the city around that. So it's at least nice that is a priority. But again, it doesn't. It's just difficult when, say, the venues that are already there, that are established, that, again, that's where I'd say most of the people view and consume music and play, right? So
I mean, it's also it's interesting when you get into the festival side of things, because usually with festivals, it's makeshift infrastructures that are being put up to accommodate that place. And so there's more leeway to actually make it accessible on a lot of fronts.
Because they can change it, like, in 2 hours. They'd be like, he needs to get here. Let's make a plywood platform all the way there or something.
Yeah, or, you know, like a crank lifts that get you up to stage heights behind stages are really, you know, they're mobile. You can rent them and use them. Same with accessible porta potties. What's been Van's experience talking to the Vancouver Folk Festival before with regards to getting performers there, Graham? I don't want to speak out of class, but
and this was relayed to me later, but one of the previous executive director was talking to someone, and his hope was to have some of our artists perform at the festival, and the response was, yeah, we could definitely get you some tickets to view. Where that kind of thought process or like stigma around that, and that was probably 15 years ago, way before my time. But long story short, I mean, the story kind of ended there, and I don't know, like it was just more a tickets thing, but that also really opened it up for myself again around the stigma with disability and just the thought process. Like, again, Simon, the stuff you come up with, I love to hear, and like just your intention or inclination with music. I've always just love what you do. And again, I look at it this way: would anyone care if they closed their eyes and were listening to music and then they opened them and then after the fact they found out that they were disabled? Like, that stigma, this is something I've really tried to show about the disabled community in music, is that isn't, the disability doesn't define your art.
Yeah, absolutely not.
No.
Right.
Unfortunately, though, it plays a big part in the PR of getting people to pay attention to what you do. You know what I mean? Like, there is a kind of they work at cross purposes. You're sort of like, well, if I post a video on YouTube and tell everyone that I have a vestigial thumb growing out of my forehead, I'll get a lot of clicks on it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, people have a weird inclination towards what the path they take to discover something new when it comes to the arts. You know? And I mean, I would never want to use, you know, my chair as some kind of like weird prosthetic propaganda for why someone should view my playing or my art.
No, of course.
You know, I think for some people, there have been times when I've done gigs and I realized, oh, this person is here, and really what makes my playing so special for them is that they think they're bearing witness to someone who's struggling to actually make those sounds.
Yeah, right.
No, seriously. And
I know what you mean.
And they think that human condition is sort of like the art actual of the moment, you know?
And with Richard and Bernie, like, he is doing some. I think that where he's got limits physicality, but those things are what makes his thing so cool.
Yeah, exactly. Mind you, by the same token, I have for me, it's all how you get to that state of mind. Like maybe you've had a trauma in your life, or you have a disability that has forced you to form a certain state of mind that, you know, drives your intention for why you play in any given moment. I don't think that's just the wrong with disabled people. Like, I think the thing I enjoy most about your playing, Paul, when I met you and we started playing these songs together that I ended up recording, is that you're very much an inside the song guy. You're not actually playing the idiomatic things on the instrument. You know, you come up with extra musical stuff that's maybe just like strange noises or harmonies I wouldn't have thought of, and it enhances the way I have my relationship to the song.
That's cool.
And it works in synergy. And you didn't arrive at that because of your disability. You know?
Yeah, right.
You managed to hide that you have a tail for all these years, and your guitar playing sounds great.
You don't know what's going on down there. But yeah, I mean, emotionally, there's certainly things that I draw on. I think like an actor almost, you know.
Of course, yeah.
Al Pacino uses something in himself to get into a scene that involves a certain state of mind, you know. Yeah. I think there's things that I use to get there. It's equally not great sometimes.
But it's an awareness and a mindfulness about the process that you want to use, right? Where it's like even before you've actually made an adjudicated decision about the note you're going to play, you're actually thinking more about like the aesthetic or the texture, or you know, allowing your body to respond in the moment to whatever the construct is, so also, you have that honest moment.
People seeing you in a chair, they will automatically assume that all of your quote unquote like emotion is coming from chair instigated things, and it's like it's not.
Yeah. No. Well, and I'm not in the chair as part of a costume of my struggle for my my existentialism. But the problem is that's the road value that you see if you walk into a cafe and I'm playing in a duo and I'm playing a country song and I'm sitting in a chair. If it's a sad country song, most people are going to be like, that song was real sad.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I get it, man. And I also get it from the viewpoint of people that, like, who can I... There's not many people that you can use as an example. I remember, Vic Chestnut's a great one.
Oh, man. Vic Chestnut is a fabulous example.
And that guy, much like yourself, man, the chair disappears all the time with him.
Well, even some of that late era Curtis Mayfield stuff when he was a quadriplegic, you're like, holy man, that is fine, you know?
Yeah. And I don't, musically, it's so happening, right? That you just like, I can't see how it could make a difference, you know? But visually, when you're sitting in front of somebody who's in a chair, you're going to see a chair, I'm assuming. You know, I always forget you're in a chair, quite frankly.
Well, it's kind of like this.
Came and picked me up one time. I was like, Simon, you're sitting in the disabled parking lot. Come on. I was like, as I was walking up to your bed, I was like, oh, this is embarrassing. What is it? I was like, oh, yeah, right. Okay, great. Right on.
Well, and it's just, I think it's really rudimentary human curiosity. Like people are interested at narratives that, some people are alienated by narratives they're not comfortable with or familiar with, and other people actually engage in them because there's a basic human curiosity.
Sure.
It's almost like saying swinging upside down on a trapeze at a circus is cool, but if you're juggling chainsaws while you're
then it's really something.
Then you'll sell the place out. It's like,
you're true.
There's a trick with a knife I'm learning to do, and it involves how my disability presents when I perform. And I'm not so sure. It's funny how I think that the hard part about the gray area in there is that there are some aspects of what we feel are, an issue with not having more of an inclusive lens when it comes to disability. Right. But some of those same qualities actually inform, a basic curiosity about wanting to invest in seeing what's going on with people who are struggling with disabilities and performing and making art, And I'm not one, I'm in a chair, but I'm not one who can figure out at the very root of it all. but just not necessarily advantage, but just opportunity be present. You know what I mean? And if and really it's the manifest of having opportunity there, if it means a specially designed stage or bathrooms I can use as a performer. But if the people who show up to the whole thing are there primarily because they were like, wow, my interest is really peaked because there's this dude playing guitar and he's in a chair, I'm not going to be like, you stupid bastard! I tell you, we can't sell you tickets.
Exactly. And touching on,
we're in a bit of a time period right now where we're at a place in society where these conscious efforts and conscious decisions, we're in the hard part of like we have to do this, and it has to be weird for a little bit. And that way, when my kids are 25 or whatever, it's not a big deal.
Exactly. And so we're in that period, you're right, where certain things get smudged together while we're trying to parse out, what is the dialectic of people having sort of a predisposition that is non-inclusive. We want to kind of dissect those mechanisms, but we want to make sure we don't throw out babies with bathwater when it comes to like just the entirety of the human experience, whether it's by an able-bodied viewer or a disabled performer. Like both of those things are valid and have to occupy the same space.
And touching on your point, Simon, I heard a quote that just reminds me on what you're I think it's exactly what you're saying. I'm not going to say it as eloquently as this person, but it's one of these situations where people to a certain degree expect that the world is brought to a disabled person, where a disabled person just wants to go out into the world. Right.
Totally.
Right. Well, and that's the funny thing, how people measure intent, right? It depends what lens you're looking through. That defines what you think the behavior of the object is. It's almost like a quantum physics thing about how you look at particles.
In terms of the being in New York and working on the play and stuff like that, there's a big diversity. Racial diversity is the big question, and it's becoming a thing where it's like, if you're going to put this show on, they're really conscious of it, to the point where we had a diversity coach come in and be like, hey, what can the lead character be black? Like, why not? And it's weird. It's like, there's no reason why not. It just never happens. But what's happening is that if you're not really consciously divvying up these parts, you're going to be here, and Broadway's going to move without you.
Right.
And you're going to look hilarious. And I think of the same thing. I think of like conversations. We got to have those conversations now, so that in 25 years you don't have to have these conversations.
Exactly.
And it's not comfortable all the time, and it's not. Sometimes feelings get hurt, but it has to happen.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who feel like their attitudes, when displayed by other voices, makes them feel a little out of their skin and kind of like, well, it's not my intent to react in a way that is not advantageous to people who have mobility issues. I'm just predisposed to feel like I don't subscribe to this or I don't subscribe to that. But that's the kind of entropy of not like wanting there to be that manifest of, everybody should deserve at least the opportunity to
conscious effort now
on the
breeds no thought in the future.
Exactly. Reactionary status quo stuff doesn't do anything to evolve the model.
Like just the idea of showing up to a venue and having it all be accessible and be like, oh, cool. This should just be all accessible all the time. But I get that it's hard. There's no question about it. Like financially, I guess that's a big deal. But I think that there's got to be ways around it. The amount of money that people donate to have their signs put up at a jazz fest, maybe they could have their signs put up at venues that they've given, $50,000 to make a simple ramp to the stage or whatever, or a lift.
Which would alleviate a lot of the issues. I was just saying, like, the ramp situation would alleviate a lot of issues in venues in general. It's like VAMS does provide, like, it's called a roller ramp that we use and truck around. But no, I'd say that's probably the number one culprit, is actually getting on stage.
Yeah, I bet. No kidding.
Well, I've always looked at the accessibility thing in able-bodied structures as very similar to the language issue in Quebec. There's all of this money to make sure that you've got an equally bilingual signage.
That's interesting.
In certain areas, like certain allophone areas in Montreal, they now have to, by law, make sure that they have French writing saying the same thing, even if it's in an all-English neighborhood.
Right.
And I'm kind of like, well, okay, so they should look at accessibility to performance opportunities is the same way, and just make sure that there's a slush fund that the government offers, so that so the people who own the building don't necessarily have to feel like, well, it's, I either honor my equity, or am I going to spend money on this to enhance my equity or not?
And it is I don't think anybody wants to be. I don't think there's one person. I hope there isn't one person who's like, I'm not. I'm pretty sure everyone's probably hip to change their building so that everyone can get in and be safe. But I'm sure that the dough is probably the huge deal there.
Right.
Mm-hmm. No, and I like that idea about and I know the government does do subsidies as well, but I think I like that the comparison with the language that's a very that kind of hits the nail on the head for me. This concludes part 2 of my interview with Simon Paradis and Paul Rigby. Stay tuned on Reimagine Radio next week for part 3 and our conclusion of this series of interviews. And again, to all our listeners out there, stay safe and keep that music flowing.